kid needs to be somebody that every single time somebody meets them, they go, I want to help. I mean, if I had to talk to 3 people, I'd be sick to my stomach. It got down to what's more important, me getting over that or me giving up racing?
If you aren't massively committed to your whole life being a professional race car driver, if you just enjoy it and everything, that's probably better, actually, when it gets right down to it. Hello, welcome to It's Not the Car. Actually, it's not Sam Smith either. It's Jeff Brown. Here today with Ross on It's Not the Car, a podcast about racing and really whatever the three of us always want to talk about. So today we got interesting subject, I think, and I've got Ross here to talk about it and learn from. So how are you today, Ross?
I'm good. And without Sam, I don't know.
It's weird.
It's weird.
Do they let us do this without adult supervision?
Well, that would assume that Sam is an adult.
Yeah, it's a big assumption.
That's
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm pretty sure there are some that would question that. So
right.
It's a podcast about cars and racing and driving and all that kind of stuff. But Sam always says, but really, it's about the people.
Yep.
Yeah. Because if it's not about the car, what is it about? Well, I guess it's about the people. And actually, I think that leads in perfectly to what we're going to talk about, because Jeff, being the father, so it's interesting. I've had people say to me, Jeff Brown, oh, is that Colin's dad? And then I've been, somewhere along the line, I'm talking about Colin. They go, Colin, is he Jeff's son? Like, I don't know which came first. I'm pretty sure I know that answer, but you have raised a professional race driver. Colin's a professional race driver. I guess by the definition of professional, he's been a professional since he was 17?
17. He's, put it this way, he's never made any income from anything, not like McDonald's or mowing grass or whatever, other than driving cars. Yeah, when he was 17, he got his first contract to drive race cars professionally. Tracy Crone. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've had a few people through the years say, Jeff, how do I do that with my kid?
Yeah, lots of people, and I get it, because I was the same way. It wasn't me who wanted it, but it was Colin. He was like, Dad, I want to make a living doing this. And obviously he was raised around me doing the race engineering. So he was at tracks and he was seeing professional race car drivers, and he got to talk to them. Guys like you, Ross, he's like, man, how could I do what Ross does? How could I do what this guy does? And whoever I was engineering at the time, he wanted to do that. He wanted to make his living driving race cars. He didn't really care what kind or anything, just he loved driving race cars. How do I do that? And so a lot of dads will ask me that question, like you said, and I give the flip answer. So I'll give it here too, because it kind of proves a point and our jumping off point for us. It's like, here's what you do. Here's the perfectly planned out path we did with Colin.
And I'm sure it's really simple.
It's real simple, right?
Yeah.
So what you do is you start out go-kart racing. That's not too hard.
Yeah.
Then you do really good in American go-kart racing, and a European factory wants you to come go-kart race in Italy and Japan and stuff. So you go over there and you do better than anybody would expect. And during that go-kart time, you race against 2 dads who have enough money to be able to afford to run the 24 hours a Daytona, and they want their kids to race in it too. So you work for free. Your kid drives with the other 2 kids. You get you get Ross Bentley to be your driver coach and teach these kids how to do it. And you do fantastic at Daytona with 3 16-year-olds. So that's the first step. Everybody should just go out and do that. Then
easy.
Then during that period, you should find a rich Texas oil man who's starting his Daytona prototype team, and against the maybe advice of his experienced racing advisors, decides to take an unknown young American kid and put him in the team. Pair him with a factory Porsche driver who's thinking this is the worst job he's ever going to have because he's got this kid who doesn't know anything. And you go racing and you win races. And aside from the fact that your kid couldn't run 2 races because he was too young and the tobacco laws wouldn't allow it, that car wins the championship and they win 3 races with Ford engines. So then the head of Ford sees that and says, wow, that kid's pretty good. I'm going to put him at Jack Roush and pay for it and put him at Jack Roush and send him NASCAR racing. And then, so you sign to a factory contract when you're 18, you go NASCAR racing and you do really well there. Then you come back after the sponsorship dries up, you come back to sports car racing and you find a really nice, good, well-funded guy. And you go win multiple championships and 4 Daytona 24-hour races and Le Mans and all of that. And you get paid, your kid gets paid all along. So those are the steps. I think we could end the show now, right? If everybody just followed
that's it.
that.
We're done.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
It was pretty.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Because that is one path.
Yeah.
That is not a path. That's not a ladder. That's not a map. That's not a...
And that's certainly the challenge, not a problem. It's a challenge with this sport, unlike baseball or hockey or football or basketball or things like that, where there is a ladder, there's a system, there's multiple leagues and age and all that kind of stuff. This sport, there's about 2,700 different directions you can go in. And even if you going, no, I only want to go to Formula One, or I only want to go sports car racing, or I only want to go NASCAR or IndyCar, whatever. There are multiple ways to get there. I mean, Colin is known as one of, certainly one of the very, very best sports car drivers in the entire world. But he spent a few years, how many years? 4 years, 5 years?
4 years in NASCAR.
In NASCAR.
Yeah.
And I believe that made him even better than he would have been. So
I can see things that he learned there that he uses, especially his restarts. Restarts on cold tires. Yeah. I mean, in NASCAR, if you cannot run amazing laps, oftentimes they'd unload the NASCAR car, and the fastest lap of the weekend would be the first timed lap of practice.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be on it.
Yeah.
So you learn. We'll talk about it, but you're right. You learn something in every little step of the way.
And that's, the point of that is that was not on the ladder.
No.
What's interesting, and we're going to get into the thinking, the traits, all of those kinds of things. But, conversations that you and I had and Colin had and things like that. I mean, when he was, 12, 13, 14, 15, in that range,
mm-hmm.
There wasn't okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. It was, sorry to say this, Jeff, but you are, as far as I know, you're not a multimillionaire.
As far as I know, the last time I checked I don't even have to check my financial statements.
Right. And that meant that you couldn't go, okay, we're going to put him in whatever. In today's world, it would be, USF 2000 Pro, and then it would be Indy Next, and then it would be Indy Cars, and you'd have a budget and know what you needed to spend every single year, and it would be multi-millions of dollars. You didn't have that, so it was almost like, who's going to give Colin a ride?
That was it. I mean, I have sitting right on the other side of this wall is a rear wing element from a Formula TR 1600 that you bought because we were at Sonoma, Sears Point, and I don't remember exactly what happened. Anyway, something happened. There was dirt on the track. Colin spun, backed it into the tire wall, bent the rear element, and we were like,
We're done.
we're done. I'm not buying one. And you were there like helping Colin, and you were like, here, go buy a rear wing element. And you paid for Colin's rear wing element. I don't remember what it was. It was all the money in the world though, because we put the rear wing element on. He went back out and he won that weekend. And there he was. You need people like that, who, like yourself, who really are invested, not because you wanted a return. That reminds me, I need to pay you back for that wing, because I know I never have.
Well, you have many times over, but and so has Colin, in what I've learned from you guys. But yeah, I can tell you. I mean, I don't know what I spent. I don't know if it was $20 or $2,000. I don't know, but it's not like I had spare cash laying around either.
Exactly.
But so let me just jump into, to me, when people say, what does it take? I don't know if it's at the top. I'm probably going to say 2 or 3 things that are at the top of the list.
Yep.
But one of the things at the top of the list is that kid needs to be somebody that every single time somebody meets them, they go, I want to help. And that's the way Colin has always been and will always be. And the number of people that I've met through the years that go, oh, I met Colin Braun. Wow. I'd love to help him in some way. And not just in, I want to write a check, because a lot of those people couldn't afford to write checks either.
Right. But
they would go out of their way to talk to other people and go, man, there's a kid that needs, an opportunity.
Yep.
And enough of those nudges. And next thing you know, you got head of Ford Motorsport going, let's get this guy into NASCAR program.
Yeah. I mean, that list, as you were saying that, you stand out as one of the top guys who have helped Colin in that way. But then I started thinking of the other people as you were talking about that. That list is incredibly long, from, just friends to, I said the Texas oil man Nick Janssen was the guy who pushed Tracy Crone to hire Colin. One of the guys. You got to hire this guy. And the team manager was like, are you crazy? No, this is terrible. The guy's going to crash it all the time. It's going to be terrible. And Nick's like, no, go ahead and do it. And there was nothing in it for Nick.
Yeah.
Other than he thought Colin deserved a shot. So,
yeah.
But how do you, so a dad calls up and says, Ross, how do I get, and you say, okay, the number one thing is you need to get people to really want to help your kid.
Well,
how do you get that?
Well, I'm going to say, I've had parents come to me and say, how do I do what Jeff did? And by the way, it's not just you, Jeff, but it's Diane, your wife.
Mostly her.
And I have actually jokingly said, send your kid, let Jeff and Diane adopt your kid and raise your kid. So, but this, I think in many ways, this will get at the core of it. Not a lot of what it takes is, you have to have the right talent. There had to be born with this. They had to be taught this. There's so much of it is, it's the way they think, the way they act, the way they behave, all of that stuff. And I don't know how much of our personality that when we talk, somebody goes, oh, I want to help that person. How much of that personality that comes across was something that somebody was born with? And how much of it was developed by the environment they grew up in, the family environment that they grew up in. And so, I've often had this little fantasy in my head that, a multi-billionaire comes to me and says, here's my 5-year-old. turn them into a world champion, NASCAR champion, IndyCar champion, IMSA-champion, whatever. Turn them into that. I think one of the things I'd probably say is, okay, they need to come and live with me.
Yeah.
Or I need to come and live with you for a while to learn what kind of environment they're going to grow up in. And because I always do this in this podcast, tangent time.
Tangent time, yeah.
People, a lot of comments are made about Lance Stroll.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's only there because Lawrence Stroll is a multi-billionaire and that's the only reason he's there. It's not the only reason he's there. And I really want to be clear about that. Here's a kid, and I think I might have even talked about this before on this show, is here's a kid who's growing up with a billionaire father, would never, ever, ever have to lift a finger, would never have to get off the couch. He'd have servants all over him. And unfortunately, we hear about this all the time of somebody that's growing up in that environment and they end up abusing drugs or something else. Lance Stroll has not done that. Lance Stroll has worked his butt off to be the best he can be. And by the way, anytime that you're on the grid of a Formula One race, I'm not saying you're in the top 20 best drivers in the world, but I'm pretty sure you're in the top 100 or so.
For sure.
And that's not bad.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think for all the, jealousies and poking and making fun of Lance Stroll, you got to give Lawrence Stroll a lot of credit for raising a kid who isn't lazy and just sitting around and taking advantage of dad's money.
Right. I mean, there's other examples in other sports, right? Serena and Vanessa Williams.
Yeah.
Okay, they didn't have the money like Lawrence and Lance Stroll, Tiger Woods and his dad. I mean, those girls and guy started out when they were 5, like you just said in your example, and the parents wanted to make them the top of their field. And maybe that's not entirely fair because the kids wanted it bad enough.
Yeah.
And the parents were willing and able to help them get there. Because people will ask me all the time, well, you're in racing. You obviously pushed Colin to be a race car driver. And da, da, da. Exactly the opposite. Because I was out race engineering on the weekends to make money to afford groceries and the mortgage and stuff like that. And that meant that Colin couldn't go to a go-kart race because I couldn't afford to send him to it on a team. It was me, Diane, Travis, his brother, and Colin, the 4 of us racing go-karts. So when we went go-kart racing, that was the only way we could go. We all had to leave. Well, we couldn't go go-kart racing when I was race engineering cars. So it was more often, Dad, can we go karting this weekend? I'd be like, no, I got to go to Sebring or I got to go to Laguna. And he's like, oh. So it was the opposite. It was like him, like, come on, Dad, come on. Can't we go? It was him trying to push me to going. And I don't know, maybe, I don't know if it works the other way. The things I've read about Tiger Woods and the Williams sisters, they wanted it really bad themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's often when I get a parent saying, hey, I've got an 11-year-old or I got a 15-year-old or I got an 8-year-old or whatever. What should I do? The very first thing I say is let them do what they love to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I have been at a local go-kart track or quarter midget racing track or something like that. And I've seen one of the great things about those sports is the parents and the kids can work together. How many hours did you spend working on the go-karts with Colin and Travis working on it as on them as well? Great family thing, right?
For sure.
But I've been at some of those tracks where most often it's the dad, not always. I've had a few through the years where it was the mom that was driving the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, most of the time it was the dad, and the dad was saying, whatever, Billy or Sally or whatever, get over here and work on the kart. And, they'd work on it a little bit, but, they're over in the dirt with their Hot Wheel cars playing with 2 other 11-year-olds.
Right.
Just having fun. And it's like, no, get over here and work. I understand teach them that, hey, you got to work for this. You got to put some effort into it, but not to the point where you just take all the fun out of it and the play out of it.
Yep. I don't know how you teach that. And maybe that does burning desire. And maybe that's the key. If you have to teach it and push that, that's bad.
Yeah.
It's either there or it's not. Expose them to it. And it's either there or not. I can go, you talked about go-kart races. You and I talked many times about this, but I think you can go to a go-kart race, quarter midget race, and watch 7 to 12-year-olds. And it doesn't take long if you spend a day at the track to figure out which of those kids has a chance to make it as a pro. You can see it at that age. And it's the way they interact with their parents, their tuner, the officials, the other competitors. And note, I just said 4 things, and not one of them was how fast they were.
I was just going to say, none of them were on the track.
On the track. Then, on the track, you can see, does the kid have the killer instinct? Is he smart? Is he thinking? Is it a 13-lap race, and he's sitting there in second or third watching what's going on, trying to figure the other guy out. You're like, I think he's faster, but he's keeping the engine cool. He's tuning it. He's adjusting. He's thinking. He's figuring out when he's going to make his move, and he makes his move and he wins, or it doesn't quite work out and he doesn't. But you can see that thinking.
Yeah.
You can pick those kids out. Man, and maybe I'm just, Colin got to race all over the world and the United States. And at the time when I said, wow, that kid's pretty good, that kid's pretty good, that guy's good, I bet my hit rate on the number of those guys that I said is pretty good and could make it as a pro, I bet my hit rate's 80%. And I'm not brilliant. I mean, the other guys could see it. It's interesting that it starts that young to me.
Yeah. Actually, I'll bet you your hit rate is 100% on identifying ones that are not going to make it.
For sure. You can see that. And then that really, you want to go, you watch the parent, and some of those kids are the parents who are spending the most money.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, the guy's just blowing his money. This is never going to work.
Yeah.
I hope he's having fun with this kid. Not that the end result has to be a pro driver. If he's spending that much money and they had the time of their lives for 7 or 8 years as a family, well worth every penny.
Go for it. Yeah.
But if he gets to the end and he goes, oh man, I spent all that money and my kid never got a ride in racing, and that was the whole point of it.
And racing sucks because it's not fair.
Right. Then it's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. But I don't know.
Well, Jeff, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
You mentioned, you used a word a few minutes ago, exposed. And I think that's one of the things that, I guess, so my daughter, when she was growing up, there was the, do I want to get her into karts? Do I want to get, and I was afraid to do that because I know that the way I approach racing, and kind of still do, is it's all in.
Oh yeah.
There's never been let's just kind of fiddle around at this. No, it's yeah. So I was afraid that I was not going to have the discipline, self-discipline, to be able to do that with my daughter. And I think one of the things that I'm very happy about with my daughter is we exposed her to the only sport more dangerous and more expensive than karting, and that's horseback riding and that stuff. But, she loves that. She loves animals and, art and computers and gaming. And so there's all these other things. And I think if you can expose them to a bunch of those things and they go, thank you very much, but I want that. You're, 90% of the way there.
I agree. And I guess now we're this episode's going to be filed under podcast for parenting tips or something, but but that's the thing. Maybe some people try too hard because they want it more than the kid.
Yeah.
And then if the kid really, really, really wants it and you're sure he wants it, that can be just as difficult because now it's going to be really expensive. And unless you're Lawrence Stroll or somebody like that, that gets really difficult. It's really hard. And that's when it comes down to you saying people who want to help. There was lots of people along the way in our example that wanted to help and gave Colin a shot here and hey, come, I can't, I'm racing this car, but we're testing. Why don't you come and test it for a day while I'm practicing for the race and just get a chance to drive this faster car or whatever. And
I mean, by the time he was 17, he had driven a lot of different cars.
Yeah.
And none of them, well, other than that one Formula Renault that you owned.
Right.
They were everybody else's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you're from the Renault 1600 to the 2-liter, that was your and the Persowski's car who had a team and, and then Mike Keski gave him a car to run on Formula Mazda and I couldn't afford that. I mean, I could afford, I'm not going to say we were living on the street, but we were a normal kind of family that, back in those days, I could afford $40,000 a year. I'll tell the number. That was it. $40,000 a year in those days would not buy you. It wouldn't buy you 2 Formula Mazda races.
Yeah.
Let alone a full season.
Yeah.
And that's all I could afford. That was it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would say so I give those dads my glib answer and they all go, ha, ha, ha. What do I really tell them? I say, I think there are some important aspects that might help. The first thing is it was what worked for us and I've seen it work for other people. You have to find a place to race where you can exceed other people's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a newcomer, you're out of karts, done really good in karts, and now you're in cars, you got to pick a class or a car or a series or whatever where you can exceed expectations, because you may not have, most people don't, like we didn't, have enough money to just grind it out. You can't do 2 years of Formula Ford 2000, 2 years of whatever the next thing is, 2 years of Formula Mazda, 2 years of Indy Lights, and then go into IndyCar. That takes too much money. You can't do that. So you got to exceed expectations where people go, wow, I never heard of that kid before. And he won both races on the weekend?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Then maybe you get somebody to take notice. So we tried to always do that, exceed expectations.
So you're better off racing, if there's a series that costs whatever. If a series costs $50,000 a year to run it, race in a series just below that, where the budget is $30,000, but spend $50,000. If you've got, that's the idea.
Yep.
Because just winning sometimes isn't good enough. You need to dominate. You need to make a big deal. Like I said, exceed expectations. Have people go, where the heck did this kid come from?
Right. And you can do that sometimes by, let's say you have enough for in that series that you picked where you want to win. You have enough money for 3 races. And you go, okay, we'll do 3 races. My suggestion would be do 1.
Yeah.
Take the other 2 races worth of money and go practice and test test at the track you're going to and target that track and da-da-da. Nobody's going to know about that. Then show up, this guy, never heard of this guy, first time in this car, and he smokes all the guys, all the hot shots.
Yeah.
And people go, wow, it's the first time he was ever in the car. They don't know that he's had 400 laps in the thing the last 2 months. That's the way to spend your money. Then then you get some recognition. And somebody in the next class might go, holy geez, okay, I might help that kid out a little bit. Or I might, I mean, work. I've seen the other side of it. I've seen guys do the other side and can pick a series and run 5th every weekend, finish 5th in all the races in their first year. And what does everybody think? Yeah, he's a 5th to 10th place guy.
Yeah.
Nobody's excited about that. Even though a kid could be really talented, it was in a really hard series, in a really class 2 steps above where he should be, and they could scrape together just enough money to do the whole season. And the kid's probably okay, but he finished 5th all the time and nobody cares.
Why are you looking at me, Jeff?
Why?
Well, because that's what I did. I mean,
but
I raced Formula Ford for 2 seasons where, I scraped together the money to do it, but I could be competitive in that. And I won.
Yep.
And then I spent well more than a decade always driving underfunded cars and never really showing what I could do or couldn't do.
Right.
And, kind of eventually kind of got a little bit of that and ended up in IMSA. The only thing that worked for me, and this is not about me, but the only thing that worked for me was that somehow I managed to get myself in an IndyCar and do some IndyCar races. And then I went into IMSA. And at that time in IMSA, if it was like, oh, he's an IndyCar driver.
Right.
They forget about he was crap in an IndyCar.
Yeah, but
and it led to driving for BMW and winning a championship. So it can work, but that took decades, and some people are a lot smarter than banging against their head against the wall for decades.
Yeah,
and so we're not talking about that kind of an approach here. We're talking about how to do it efficiently, effectively, and successfully.
Right. It was like the Team 16 thing. That was, I thought that was fantastic from the exceed expectations thing, because the expectations were so low.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you remember the actual reports in the magazines, or I guess the internet was out then. But anyway, guys, racing journalists saying the kids will never even make it till sundown, which is like 4 hours after the race started. The car will be out, they'll be crashed, it'll be a disaster.
There were people that bet that they wouldn't turn their headlights on.
Right.
And some of the people that were betting were guys that were on the crew of our car.
Exactly.
Obviously, they had not been paying attention to the way they had all been performing up until then and practice and everything. But that was a case of that whole program was done right. It was kind of like, to your point of, there was probably enough budget there to go and do a few races. Mm-hmm. But all of it was focused on one race, make a splash, make a point.
Yep.
And it did that.
Yep. That exceed expectations. And then you're doing it right when you get to the point where you're like, man, the expectations are just too high now. Everybody expects him to do fantastic. Then you're probably already getting paid.
And there's another subtle, not so subtle part of this is when your kid is in a situation where, let's say you as the parent are going, okay, I've got budget to your example, I've got budget for 3 races. Let's go do 3 races. And the kid finishes 5th, which probably isn't all that bad.
Right.
But the kid goes, yeah, okay, I finished 5th. If they do 1 race and there's all sorts of things, as we know, in racing that could go wrong, and they may not win, but you've given them a chance to win. They're going to come out of there going, I can race these guys.
Right.
Whether they won or, we're running strong or whatever. So their confidence level, their belief in themselves starts at the right level in the very beginning.
Yep.
And because if again, I can speak from experience here. If you spend a lot of time driving underfunded, uncompetitive cars, you get to a point where I don't care how strong your self-confidence is, there come a point in time where you go, is it really the car?
Yeah.
And you don't want your kid to ever question that.
Right. Right. And that's the thing about winning.
Winning's good.
Winning gives you that confidence. And it also, the other thing from the exceed expectations is you have to win. You know, you can't, nobody cares. This is going to sound bad, but I'm going to say it anyway. Nobody cares who's fifth in the Formula Ford 2000 championship. That guy, nobody's looking at that guy going, I think I'm going to stick him as a silver driver in my LMP2 car.
Is there a fifth place in those series?
Yeah, is there? No.
Right.
Nobody cares about that.
Yeah.
And so you got to win. I would rather win, and I don't know these junior formulas good enough. I would rather win the Radical Championship than be fifth in Formula Ford 2000 championship.
Yep. Yeah. Winning's good. It builds a habit. It builds a belief, all of that stuff. And you need to make that.
Right.
That needs to be built into the program.
Yep. Yep. And I guess that brings us, or I just did it, and maybe we shouldn't even talk about it, but, you know, the whole ladder system and all of that. I mean, Mazda obviously worked really hard, especially when John Doonan was in charge of trying to make a ladder system, the road to Indy, and then he had a sports car thing going, and I'm not sure if that's still going, but there's kind of a ladder system to an IndyCar, maybe sports cars with the MX-5. Connor Zilic is a great example. And I don't know Connor other than I've watched what he did, and this is funny now. I just think about it. It went back to he got a ride in the P2 car, and I said, "Who's this Connor Zilic?" I said it to some guy, and he goes, "Oh, he ran the MX-5 Cup." And he's the guy that won like everything in MX-5 Cup, like won every race. Of course, he didn't, but he was dominant enough where I, who don't pay attention to MX-5 Cup, went, "Man, there's a guy over there who just wins all the time."
He hops into, I think the first season, like he just did like 2 or 3 races, or I can't remember. He didn't do the whole season, but he jumped in and he won those races. Yeah. To your point,
exceed expectations. Nobody expected him to do that.
Yeah.
And Colin that's like the Daytona prototype thing. He got with Jörg Bergmeister and they won their second race.
Yeah.
And people went,
yeah,
who is this guy?
Yeah.
Never heard of him before.
Yeah.
And so whatever the Zilic family's doing obviously worked, but I think it has some traits to what I saw work personally for us, and I've seen work for some other people. So,
and I think you and I are, we've seen Connor Zilic kind of do some stuff along the way, and we are massively impressed. I would love the opportunity to sit down with his family and understand kind of what went through all of that. Because I know there are some people, I've heard people say, "Oh man, that kid," essentially they're saying he popped out of the womb with all his natural driving talent.
Yeah.
And that just makes him, I got to think there's more to it than just that.
I think you're right. There's some guy listening to this or some guy going, "Man, when he was 5 years old in kid karts and went to juniors in the smallest karting class, I could tell the kid was going to be good. I guarantee you he was good at the go-kart track." And I didn't say good at go-karting. He was good at the go-kart track.
Yes.
There's
well, and that brings it back to you could go to your example. Okay, you've got money to do 3 races. You say, okay, we're going to take the budget for 2 of those races. We're going to test, we're going to practice, we're going to really work hard, and we're going to go make a big splash in one race. Kid shows up, he wins the race, and you go, yes, mission accomplished. But along the way, the kid has been a complete you-know-what to everybody he met in the paddock. Guess what? They're going to get forgotten.
Yep.
And people go, man, the kid's good. We've talked recently about a few drivers we know who unbelievably fast, win races, know how, like they're really, really good, but their career has gone nowhere because of who they are off the track.
Right.
And I know race teams who have just said, look, there's more than one really fast, great race driver out there. And if I've got a choice between this one, who I enjoy working with, and this one over here, who is a complete, I'm picking this one.
Yep.
So you can't just have one without the other.
No. And there's tons of examples of people who have succeeded in doing the opposite of that, of having a good personality, finding a guy. And sometimes we should talk about that. It's not all just, can I get to the point where Roger Penske hires me for his IndyCar or for his NASCAR Cup car. Those rides are few and far between, but you can be a professional driver. And we started this whole thing out saying, how do you become a pro driver, which is getting paid to drive race cars? The majority of the guys getting paid to drive race cars in the world are driving and being paid by a gentleman driver, sportsman driver, pro-am driver, businessman driver, however you want to say it. Those guys, a lot of times the personality of the driver, because they could pick from a wide range of very fast guys, but they want to go to dinner with them. They want to have him come over and hang out with him and his wife or his buddies or whatever. They want to they want to enjoy being around that pro driver. And if you can become that person, then you're his guy, quote, his guy. And you can drive with a guy like that forever. And the number of examples are a lot. I just because Andy Lally retired 3 weeks ago, brought Andy to my mind. He's been with John Potter for, I don't know,
10 years,
10,
I think
12, a number of years. Andy's a very, very good race car driver, very smart, won 5 Daytona 24-hour races and multiple championships. I'm a big fan of Andy's. I've worked with him quite a bit. He helped us out on Team 16 even.
Yep.
Great guy, Andy. Fantastic. But he did all the things right where John Potter would never even think for a million years of getting a different guy. Even though Andy might not be as fast today as he was 20 years ago, doesn't matter because Andy did all the other things right. He had to be fast, and he was for sure. But he did all those other things right. And that's, if, the small number of people that are 10 years old now and want to be in Formula One and are going to make it into Formula One, that's a small number. Doesn't mean you can't be a pro driver. So my advice would be work on those other things. Look at how an Andy Lally did it. Look at how the guy who's driving for us, Matt Bell, he has 2 or 3 guys that really like to race with Matt.
Yeah.
Because Matt has the right personality. Tons of guys like that.
It reminded me, that I grew up around sprint cars and super modifieds, short track oval racing, big winged cars and stuff like that. And the number of cars that were owned by, most of them were not owned by the driver.
Right.
The driver was put in the car because they could wheel the car and they were a good person out of the car.
Yep.
But most of my, I'm thinking because, living in the Pacific Northwest, the number of cars that were owned by somebody that owned a logging company or a big, mechanical shop that looked after big diesel trucks that went into mines and stuff
Trucking company. Yeah.
Trucking companies. There's so many. And I think maybe subtly I learned some of that just from being around all of that as a kid.
Yeah.
I realized that somebody will pay to put you in the car if you're fast and you are a decent human being.
Likeable.
Yeah.
And I would say to people, don't underestimate cultivating that it can't be phony. That never works.
Yeah.
But that is a skill equal to finding the right turn-in point or getting your braking properly down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a skill that you need to work on, develop. You're trying to work on getting that braking point right, or getting that apex right, or getting the throttle down right. You're trying to work on that all the time, right? All race car drivers do. Don't, or spend just as much time on that other stuff, thinking about it. How did I come across? Let me give, it just popped in my mind. Alan Kawicki. Most people listening to this probably don't even know who he was. NASCAR champion. I grew up with Alan. We raced short track cars from the time we did the first dirt track car when he was 16 and I was 13. And so I've known Alan forever. Alan wanted to be a NASCAR champion from the time he was 10 and did it. We talked all the time on the phone. And we would have these long conversations that lasted for a week and never really ended. He would just a thought would stop, he'd hang up. Then I would call back a day later and the conversation would start right off with the last sentence that we had. Yeah, but if the sway bar is too soft, then wouldn't it, we did all of that. One time I called him up and I said, "Oh, you sound tired." And he goes, "I do? Just a minute. Hang up and call back." And I was like, "Okay." And I hung up. Ring, ring. "Hello, Alan Kawicki." He said, "Do I sound tired now?" I said, "No, you sound good." He goes, "Good." Man, I cannot sound tired if I pick up the phone. That is that's, I don't know who's going to be calling. I need to be sparky and energetic, and I don't know who it's going to be, but that's the way he approached things.
Yeah. So, story times, I guess. When, for most of the beginning of my career, I was spent all this time. I spent every moment that I wasn't in the car, working in the car, I spent looking for sponsorship. And it was one of those things that it was a fantastic lesson. And I really appreciate learning about marketing and different things and being able to present information, all that kind of stuff, and selling that. But there got a point where I realized that, look, I'm not good enough to be able to sell multi-million-dollar sponsorships to go to race in IndyCars. And I don't know what it was, but something sort of clicked in my head that was, rather than looking for a sponsor, surround myself with people who, again, not in a phony way, but just surround myself with people who have a common interest. And the next thing I knew, I was surrounded by people who had a lot of influence. Some of them had some money. And, I'll still remember the day that we got a group of about 12 people in Vancouver together in a room and kind of just said, this is what I'm trying to do. And the next thing I know, one's going, well, we could do this, and that guy, and I know this guy and this guy. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, there's this momentum of things happening. And I realized, so when people say to me, how do you find sponsorship? I go, here's some tips, but really focus on surrounding yourself with people who could help you. But then the most important part is find ways to make it worthwhile for them. You need to make it you don't want somebody going, oh, I'm going to help this guy. And then eventually 2 months later going, now I'm feeling like I'm being used.
Right.
I can guarantee you there has never been anybody that's ever interacted with Colin who got to a point with going, I feel like Colin's using me.
Mm-hmm.
Colin doesn't use people.
Right.
And he inspires and motivates them to do things that help him as well.
Right.
And that way both of you win.
Gain. Right.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned something that I kind of know the backstory because you've told it before, but I think people should hear this. We were talking about cultivating that kind of a thing, like the, groups of people and stuff like that. And working on that just as hard as you're working on your break points and everything. You, I know, have told the story before about being uncomfortable in speaking or in groups or having to sell yourself, uncomfortable having to sell yourself, but you forced and practiced and trained yourself to do that because you knew that was the only way you were going to be able to find the money or find the people or do that. So there's a case of, I'm not good at this. I know it's important, realizing it's important, which a lot of people never even get to that point, and then working your butt off to try to get yourself to do that. Am I overselling that?
No. So when you say uncomfortable doing those things, that's an understatement.
You hated it.
I mean, I was the guy that if I had to talk to 3 people, I'd be sick to my stomach beforehand. But you're right. I mean, it got down to what's more important, me getting over that or me giving up racing. And those are my choices. And it was like, there is no choice there. That's just a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I got to figure out. And so, for somebody listening to this and going, how do I help, my kid or whatever? One of the things is things like media training, public speaking. And I'm going to say all of that training around that is all good. It's kind of like saying, here's the break points and here's the line for a corner. But until they have the programming to be able to do that, that's the most important thing. And understand, I spent months doing mental imagery, mental programming, visualizing of being in different uncomfortable situations in groups of people. And I see myself standing up and going, and then also, I mean, I remember one of my first big wins in a pro Formula Ford race. And then the local TV station said, we want you to come on TV and be interviewed in a sports talk show kind of a format.
Cool.
And I was terrified. And I'm walking in and I'm going I just won a race that day. And that evening I'm going in and I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I'm shaking, I'm sweating. And then I went, I just won a race against some of the best West Coast pro Formula Ford racers. If I can do that, then I can do this.
Right. And
so learning how to manage that part of it. So there's that whole mental game part of it that, if you want your kid doing this stuff, and I don't know, Jeff, I was just kind of thinking about that every time I say, want your kid. I think hopefully there's things in this that apply to, you're a track day driver and, you want a couple of your buddies to help you out. Hopefully there's some things that overlap there.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, and it doesn't mean, we touched on it a little before, it doesn't mean that if you aren't massively committed to your whole life being a professional race car driver, if you just enjoy it and everything, that's probably better, actually, when it gets right down to it.
Yeah.
I think it was Jim Whitaker, alpinist, American alpinist, really good climber.
Yeah.
Said that somebody asked him who's the best climber in the world, and he said the guy having the most fun.
Yes.
And I thought,
I love that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So maybe the track day guy, if you got to really ask yourself, is it worth going through, if you're a youngster right now listening to this and you're like, try to really understand what the commitment level is, what you have to do, what you have to give up, how hard you have to work at it. Some of the things we talked about, if you're willing to get a video camera out or your iPhone nowadays and do mock interviews of yourself and then go back and criticize yourself. Oh, I shouldn't have looked at the camera, or I should have said this, or I should have said that. If you're willing to spend hours and hours and hours of your free time instead of out, whatever kids do now, playing video games, you're going to do that instead. And you're willing to do all this hard work, and not willing to, but that's all that you're interested in, great. So but if you are forcing yourself to do that because that's what I have to do, and maybe it's just not the right thing. Maybe you should find something that you really enjoy more and that is such a passion that nobody has to prod you at all, because it's a massive commitment to reach that level.
And earlier on I said, this is at the top of the list. Well, the other thing that's at the top of the list, and maybe even higher on the top of the list, is work ethic.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how much of that is somebody's born with and how much of it is developed through the environment they grew up in, the culture they grew up in. But, and Jeff, I remember the story, and I can't remember if you told me this. Yes, you told me this story about Colin when he was like 13, and you walking past his bedroom, and he's on the phone going, "Thank you, Mr. Rahal," or something. Can you just tell that story? Because here is a 13-year-old who's doing what it takes.
Yeah, it was, I think it was when Rahal, who was the guy who ran Rob Edwards? Did he run Rahal's for a while?
I think so.
I can't remember. Let's say it was. It was whoever the head of, so they got a Formula BMW team that they were going to run.
Yep.
Colin wasn't old enough quite to be able to do that, but somehow, I don't know how, he got a hold of the head of the team manager at Rahal Racing. We'll say it was Rob Edwards. And I walked by the bedroom, like you said, and he said, "Yes, Mr. Edwards. Okay, thank you. Yes, I know. Okay, that's cool. That's great. I'd really like to do that. Thank you. Okay, could I get your email address? Okay, thank you. That's great. Oh, really? Okay, thanks. Well, what was that, Colin? Oh, that was Rob Edwards, the head of Rahal Racing. They got a BMW team." I said, "You're racing go-karts?" He goes, yeah, but you can do that in a year and a half. I can go run Formula BMW. I said, "So you just called him?" He goes, "Yeah, I wanted to let him know that, ask him what it would take and what I should practice on and how would I be ready to be good so that I could drive one of their Formula BMWs." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. What did he say?" And he said, "Well, make sure you keep winning go-kart races, keep working on it, study the cars, da-da-da-da." And then at the very end, I said, "Well, could I, send you how I'm doing in the karting this year, some results and stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. Here's my email address." And he goes, "That was so great because now I can email Rob Edwards and tell him how I've been doing."
Yeah.
And that was the kind of stuff. It was one other quick example. I walked by one time, and this isn't, the only reason I give these examples is because I lived through them. Other people have done this and more, I'm sure other kids have, but going to Road America, and Colin walked in the room and he's got this like chart kind of drawn out with like cutouts of faces and stuff. And it's like an org chart thing. And I go, "What's that?" He goes, "Oh, that's GM Racing's org chart. And here's the head of GM Racing. Here's the head of sports cars. Here's the head of NASCAR. Here's the head of IndyCar. And the guy's underneath him and da-da-da. And he's got these faces cut out. I don't know where he got them, off the internet or whatever." And I said, what are you using that for?" "Well, I'm going to Road America with you, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm going to walk around. I know these guys will be there because the Corvettes are racing." And he goes, "I want to go talk to some of these guys." And he was not even racing cars yet. He was still, maybe he was just in cars, Formula TR. So he was like 14 or 15. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And go by the upper concession stand at Road America one time, and there's Colin sitting there with some guy in a suit and obviously a very important businessman, and they both got ice cream cones, and there's Colin talking to him. I was like, "What is this kid doing?" Asked him who that was, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that was the head of all of GM sports car racing." And I went up to him and said, "Hey, I'm Colin Braun. I'm racing cars. Would you have a minute for some advice?" And the guy said, "Sure, I'll buy you an ice cream cone." And they sat down and had ice cream cones and talked for 5 minutes.
So two things there. One is, Jeff, how many times did you tell Colin to go and do that?
0. Absolutely 0.
It was his passion.
Yep.
And the second thing is, I think some of the most valuable words you can ever say to somebody is, can you give me some advice?
Yeah.
I don't care who you are and what level of person you're talking to. When you ask somebody for advice, all of a sudden they go, "Oh, I don't care." Like, you could be saying that to Roger Penske. Roger Penske doesn't need his ego stroked.
Right.
But it does kind of stroke his ego a bit.
Right. That's a really good point, because both of those instances were him talking to the Rob Edwards guy. What should I do to get into a Formula BMW? Him talking to the Corvette guy. Obviously, Colin can't drive a Corvette now. He's 14.
Yeah.
But how should I get there? I'd love to drive for you one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm in karts now. What should I do? And
Yeah.
he's asking advice. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So it's yeah. Have we talked about how to pick your brake points yet for a corner?
No, because I think it's
Oh, well, that's part 2 of this, right?
part two. Yep. I have the answer for that. Then what you do is if you've sorted all the things we've just talked about, along the line, not then, but during all of that, you buy all the Speed Secrets books and understand everything in there in all of the Speed Secret books. And while you're at it, buy Carroll Smith books and understand all of that kind of stuff. Because the plain simple fact is the guys you're competing against for those pro rides have all done that.
So maybe Jeff, maybe we finish on this is because we're probably getting to that point where Sam would be kind of giving us the nod, right?
Right.
Yeah. With the big hook or whatever it is. But how much of Colin's success is due to what he learned from you, from the engineering car setup, that part of it, or just how does the sport work? How much of Colin's success is because of that?
More of how the sport works.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
The engineering part of it came organically. There were never any lessons. There were not like, okay, here's a chalkboard and here's how you figure out a roll center and all that kind of stuff. There were certainly lots of debriefs, but the debriefs, you saw them in cars. The debriefs happened with the car up on high stands, him on one side of the car, me on the other side of the car with wrenches, and we're changing gears or we're checking this or we're checking that because he was a mechanic too. We all mechanicked and, we had to, and that's what we did. So there weren't really any like formal lessons, but I suppose as the son of an engineer, we just talked about it that way. And for sure, there were some things that, like you said, if a guy came along and said, here's my 5-year-old, make him a good race car driver. For me, there were a lot of things like, man, I wish some of the drivers that I was engineering in IndyCar next weekend knew this. And so I could go, well, here we have a car. Let's try to show Colin how that feels or how that works. And, so that when he gets to IndyCar, the engineer's never going to go, oh, that guy doesn't even know anything about that. Yeah. He's going to be better prepared.
Yeah, I think, again, if somebody came along and handed us a 5-year-old today, certainly part of it would be some deliberate kind of formal training on here's how a third spring works, right. Here's how this works. And then like we did with our driver development camps years ago of go on the track and come back and give us feedback. Actually, the way you said that, explain it this way.
Yeah.
And, and then we made a change of the car to do this, go feel that. And kind of going through all those sweeps and things we've talked about before, but there would be, certainly a part of that. But I'm often reminded of, the drivers that I've co-driven with or had as teammates through the years. And some of them are like unbelievable, their technical knowledge. And then some of them, it's surprising they know how to drive to the grocery store.
Right.
With their lack of, and this is not a knock, but years ago at Daytona and Sebring, Danny Sullivan, Indy 500 winner, was co-driver with me. Mm-hmm. And I remember after a session, I came in and I said something like, this was probably about 2 years after spending those 3 days at Sebring with you working on dampers.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember coming in and going, yeah, it feels like this. It's like we need more front rebound. And I turned to Danny and he goes, don't look at me. He says, I don't know what a spark plug is. And I'm kind of like, really?
Wow.
And he had no real feedback about the car.
Right.
Every now and then you go, yeah, it pushes too much. It's too loose.
Yeah.
Where? I don't know. So you can make it.
For sure.
But here's the thing. Yeah. And take Danny Sullivan's personality and his likability and his promotability and all of those things. Those were like cranked up to 1,050, right? And so whatever he lacked in that area, he made up for in another area.
Right.
And there are other drivers that are really strong technically, And sometimes that's a good thing if you're working in a team that needs a driver that's really good technically. You may get the nod, not because of your speed, but because you have a better, stronger technical knowledge.
Right.
Another one might get it because they're better. They've got 200,000 Instagram followers, right? So it's a puzzle. You got to put the pieces together.
Exactly. It's a mix. You can think about, maybe this is the closing thing. When you're thinking about what's important, look at some of the top level drivers. And I think you might find it's not the same, like your Danny Sullivan example.
Yeah.
You can go back quickly to Ayrton Senna. Maybe not the most personable guy, but technically very strong and talented.
And inspired the people around him because of his massive commitment
right,
and passion. Yeah.
But that's not the same as Scott Dixon.
Right.
Scott Dixon is a different mix.
Yeah.
That has 7 IndyCar championships or whatever he's got.
Six. But I was talking to Colin a week or so ago, who co-drove with Scott in Daytona, right?
Yep.
And well, you know that. But Colin, who is one of the hardest working drivers in the sport, said, "Wow, Scott Dixon, the effort he puts in at this point in his career, his commitment is off the charts."
I mean, if there's a guy that could coast and could do a one-off, well, I guess he's doing all the long races, but he could do 4 long races in the Acura GTP without, just kind of phone that in and do it for the fun of it, it would be Scott.
Yeah.
But nope. He was in the simulator every time Colin was there. He was at all the tests. He was in all the debriefs. He was getting to the track for the meetings early. He was staying to the end, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to do that.
Yeah. So all of that is just something that kids are born with. So if your kid isn't born with all that stuff that we've talked about, go find another sport.
Well, I guess that's it for this episode. That was pretty fun.
So Sam usually reads us out, and I don't know. I mean, he says things like Sam's the creator.
Sam is the creator.
Mike Perlman, the unbelievably fantastic, extraordinary executive producer. Yes. You and I are goofballs.
Just guys hanging out. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we got guys hanging out. And then we have to say something like, Patreon.
Thanks to our Patreon members.
Right. Thanks to those guys.
I got an email from one of them this morning asking me a question about something else. And I remember just reading that and going, whatever you want, dude. I'm going to answer your question till the very end because
Exactly. And I know we've recorded some Patreon specials for those guys only. So those are coming out. There'll be more of those because we're back in the swing of things now for this season. Enjoy the show and we'll see you next time. Have fun.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really fun.
That was.
Have fun, everybody.